In today's episode, Alex offers some excellent advice about updating the heating and cooling systems in your old house. And later, you'll meet Melissa and Matt Dunphy. Melissa and Matt are privy diggers, amateur archaeologists, and the hosts of the Bog House Podcast. But first, I am Stacy Grinsfelder from Blake Hill House, and I am the host of True Tales from Old Houses. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am really excited about today's episode. Alex is as brilliant as ever during Q&A, and Melissa and Matt's story is fascinating. Our discussion ran a little longer than normal because we couldn't help ourselves. I mean, put three podcasters together and there is no shortage of conversation. So I'm going to keep my remarks now pretty brief. That actually works really well because we've all had COVID here. It recently swept through Blake Hill House like wildfire, and my voice is still recovering. I do apologize for that. Some people get a deep, lovely radio voice when they're sick, but mine turns into more of a nasally whine punctuated by sniffing and coughing. Fortunately, we've all recovered well with lots of fluids and rest. Now, during the past 2 weeks, there were some good days, and I finished the front entry hall, a project 3 years in the making. Now, not to confuse the issue, but the front entry is not the main entrance into the foyer with the grand staircase. You know the one. That one's still a mess. That's my legacy, my Everest. The front entry hall that I'm talking about is actually the entrance off the street side of the house. You can see all the before and afters from the front entry on the blog now, and I am working on the field guest bath project again, somewhat reluctantly, but it has to be done. So there will be updates and progress reports at blakehillhouse.com. Okay, just a few announcements. I will be in Fort Wayne, Indiana this weekend, April 15th, 16th, and 17th. If anyone wants to book a window restoration or planning consultation, I will drop a link to my scheduling calendar right in the show notes. I do offer virtual consultations too, so no matter where you are, if you need my help, I am here through your phone or computer. And I guess I really haven't talked about my consulting service. It's something that I started this year. Virtually or in person, I can help you plan and prioritize a whole host of old house related tasks. Sometimes it is all very overwhelming, especially in the beginning. One of the most common questions I get asked about window restoration is, how do I even get started? And of course, the answer is, it just depends, right? You can find out more about my services and fees through the link on the show notes. Next up, I mentioned this last episode, but May 13th through 15th, Steve Quillian of Wood Window Makeover is hosting another historic homes workshop, and I have an accurate location for you this time. The workshop will be held at Heritage Village in Largo, Florida, which is right near Tampa. I'm flying in and out of Tampa. We'll be working on the Turner House, a very cute bungalow. I know there are a lot of bungalow fans out there. Now, I'm just one of several teachers leading hour-long sessions on Saturday. John Rogers and Chris Hewitt will both be there. They've been on the podcast before. Andrew Wing from Saving Old Windows will be there, and he was the pro that was restoring windows in Louise for Lane and Kevin Berry of our Restoration Nation. You may remember that story. Lane and Kevin were deep into the restoration of a house that they call Louise when lightning struck a tree beside it and the house burned to the ground. It was such a horrible story, really, truly the stuff of nightmares. And I'm glad no one was hurt. Andrew's work was destroyed and he lost most of his tools too. So Andrew is very skilled and he'll be there. Preservation specialist Katie Tautman is on the schedule. My previous mentor, Jim Baxter. It is going to be great. Then on Sunday, we'll be guiding small groups through basic window restoration and maintenance. We'll be making actual repairs to the windows on the Turner House. So it's a way to both learn and give back. If you want to come a few days early, you can actually sign up for the week-long hands-on sash making course taught by Steve. Steve has a portable workshop and he will show you how to build everything from screen frames to divided light sash windows. And you're going to come away from that knowing more than I do. That's for sure. Tickets are on sale now, and I will post a link to those. And finally, there's a new Instagram live session available on my Blake Hill House Instagram account and the True Tales from Old Houses Facebook group. The guest was my husband, Andy. He has been a mystery to so many of you. And even though he really wanted to talk about sports and science fiction, we sat down to answer some questions and talk about old house stuff instead. That session is available now, and the next one will be Friday, April 22nd at 8 p.m. I'll announce the topic and guest earlier that week. All right, that's it. The whistly, whiny, nasal portion of the show is complete, and Q&A is up next. For today's Q&A, Alex from Old Town Home is back. Hi, Alex.
Hi, Stacy. Thanks for having me back again.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. Today's question was made for you.
Excellent. I can't wait to hear it.
Well, I can't think of anyone else with a better perspective on this topic. So are you ready?
I'm ready. Hit me.
All right, here is the question. This person says, we need a heat system upgrade. We currently have oil-fueled hot water radiators in bad shape. Should we repair the heating system, replace it, get central heat? What?
Well, there are 1,000 different options. That's one of the things about this. And I've gone through this a couple different times, moving away from an oil-fired boiler radiator system on one of our houses. And I've also moved away from a purely forced air furnace in another house to a gas-fired boiler. So I've gone kind of back and forth on different approaches, and I think I have one that is my personal favorite now that would hopefully work well for this person.
So can you tell me, really quick, before you tell me what you chose and why, can you tell me why you wanted to get away from what you had?
Yes. So there are two different reasons. One, the oil-fired boiler led to one of the most dramatic, horrible things in my life, and our entire house froze as a result.
We talked about this on one of the episodes. It was so hard.
It was difficult, and it's been years now. Geez, it's been 6 years, I think. And our new system is doing great. But all going back, we had an oil-fired boiler, and the boiler went out. It needed electricity to fire. The electricity went out at the house. It was a second home for us, so we weren't there when this happened. When the electricity had come back on, the house was already so cold that the water line had frozen and had started bursting. So the boiler couldn't fire because it didn't have any water circulation going through it. And then when that happened, the whole house froze and every single radiator burst, every single pipe in the house burst. We had to replumb the whole house.
I still make the same face every time I hear that story.
It's gotten to the point now where our house is better as a result. And it was a great learning experience. I'll put all the silver linings I possibly can on this horrible event. And we even learned that when your whole house freezes, your toilet traps will break as the water in your toilet freezes.
Who knew?
I know, these are life experiences.
Well, thank you for sharing them with us.
Yeah. But so in that situation, let me say also the other one that we moved away from was just out of purely a desire to move away from a gas-fired forced air furnace. A gas-fired forced air furnace is not very comfortable heat, especially one that was installed in the early 1980s, I think. It's dry. It's the sort of thing, everybody knows it who lives in cold climates. You're in a room, you're freezing cold when it's off. When it's on, it's blazing hot and your skin's getting dry. So you can never really get comfortable in the house because it's always on again, off again. That's solved with a lot of new systems with variable speed, but it's not comfortable.
I sleep with a humidifier blowing right on me or all night long. I have a forced air gas heater, and all night long I just cough and cough and cough. And then in the midwinter, I have to slather my skin, my hands, everything with like the oiliest moisturizer I can find, or else I look like, I'm dating myself, the crypt keeper, like when you wake up in the morning.
Yeah, I know this well. This is what we dealt with for years. Also, if you happen to have leaky windows, it's hard to maintain good solid humidity inside in the winter. So, you're always fighting against these balances.
As I work on my balusters and I see that, the staircase, I have this big project, the ongoing project that is my legacy of restoring my staircase. And half of the 20 balusters that go up the staircase are actually broken or cracked. And the friend I have, Dale, he's helping me with it. And he said, I can't even imagine what abuse these took to break. And I'm automatically thinking, I don't think it was abuse. I think it was just the dry air in the winter in our house.
All your balusters broke between January and February.
Yeah, they look like my face. All right, go ahead.
So, looking at the oil-fired system that we got rid of, we had a luxury of a large yard there. So we ended up moving on that system to a fully electric geothermal system. We could run horizontal loops because we have a large front yard. So we have 3 loops that run out 200 feet out and back on the house. So we moved to forced air for that house, but all heating and cooling is taken care of by forced air. But that was a very expensive project because we had to install ductwork where there was no ductwork before. We had to figure out how to install it in an old home without running soffits everywhere of that ductwork. We wanted to disguise it. So we ended up with split systems, one in the attic, one in the crawl space in the utility room to feed the house separately. And installing geothermal is just oftentimes very cost prohibitive because if you don't have a large yard, you have to rent drilling equipment and drill 300 to 400 feet straight down into the earth to run your lines. So that's not usually a completely feasible approach to things when somebody's moving from an existing system and wants to replace it with something that's a little bit better without, incurring a huge cost with it. It's more for situations like we had where your whole house freezes and you're trying to rethink your entire plumbing and heating system. Now, on the other side of things, I mentioned we had forced air. We moved there to a gas-fired boiler and moved away from forced air through the whole house to using floor heating, radiant floor heating on the first floor, and then hydronic heating on the second floor using a hydronic coil in the air handler.
Okay, you're going to have to stop and tell us what hydronic is.
Yep, I will describe it. So anytime you hear hydronic heating, you're talking about hot water. You're using the heat of water to transfer to something. So a radiator system is a hydronic heating system. You're transferring the heat from your water to your radiator. The warm radiator is then warming up the items in your room. So instead of heating the air directly, it's heating the envelope of the room through heating elements that are all through the room. When I talk about a hydronic coil, it's similar to a heat pump or an air conditioner where coolant gets run and that air gets passed over, and then that coolant heats or cools the room with a heat pump or just cools it with an air conditioner. A hydronic coil runs hot water through a coil. The air runs over this, what essentially is a big radiator, and it heats up the air as it passes it. And then warm air comes out of the system, but it's not flame heated air. So it's not dry the same way that it is with traditional gas-fired furnace.
So where is that hydronic coil in your house? Is that one thing, or is that something in every room, like a radiator?
It's one thing on the air handler. So you have your air handler wherever your air conditioning is, and right beyond the air handler is the hydronic coil. So the air handler runs and it blows air over the coil as it goes out to the rest of the house.
Okay. So to get back to the question, you said you have a favorite. What would you suggest for this person?
Whenever anybody talks with me, if they have an existing boiler, I always say, move to a gas-fired boiler, or if natural gas isn't available to you, move to a propane-fired boiler. A high-efficiency wall-hung boiler reduces the footprint of the old, antiquated, giant cast-iron boilers from the days of yore, and saves you a ton of space. You can also do a combi system, so you have on-demand hot water with a boiler together. So you've got domestic hot water heating and heating for your home, all coming from a single, roughly the size of a suitcase hung on the wall. And it's a great solution too. I mean, in terms of, we have a Navion. We both have a Navion hot water heater, on-demand hot water heater, tankless hot water heater, and also a Navion boiler. And they're hung next to each other. And it's because we installed them at 2 separate times. But had we done it at the same time, we would have done the combi unit because you have all in one in that situation. And it saved a lot of room in the basement. The one other thing I would say here is when you install a gas-fired boiler, that can just replace your existing heating system. If you're already using radiator heat, you replace it with a new boiler and you run that new boiler to those radiators and it works just fine. But the thing that's my absolute favorite thing to do is what we did here in our house. We don't have any radiators. So we did staple up radiant floor heating below the floor on the first floor, which makes our feet comfortable all winter long. The floor, usually the temperature of the water that runs through the floor is about 115 degrees because we have wood floors. Any hotter than that will start to damage the floor by overheating it and drying it out. So what we end up with in our house is first floor is heated from the floor with 115 degree water. Second floor is heated with that hydronic coil that's on the air handler. And generally speaking, our house stays a very comfortable 72 degrees pretty much all winter long. And our heating bills went from when we first bought our house, when it was electric heat on the second floor, gas-fired furnace on the first floor. And in the height of winter, it was $400 to $500 per month usually, combined, electric and gas. Now, this is 20 years later with increasing costs and everything like that. Our average heating cost in the winter is about $120 per month.
That is shocking to me.
It's crazy. And that's not, I mean, we did some insulation improvement in the attic, but our walls are still plaster on brick. Everything is still pretty much exactly the same as it was. And that's just with heating system upgrades. Wow.
So just to clarify your radiant floor heating. So are you actually feeling any air in your house anywhere, or is it just that the floors are warm and that heat is staying?
The floor becomes our radiator, essentially. The floor is warm, so our feet are warm, and everything that touches the floor, so our couch, our walls, our entertainment center, whatever you're talking about, it also absorbs some of that heat. So all of the elements of the room, the envelope of the room becomes the heater. So just the fact that your feet are warm allows you to keep the temperature a little bit cooler and you stay comfortable. And then everything in the room ends up getting warm, so you're warmer based off of that as well.
If I had that, I would be like a lizard. I would just be laying on the floor, like on a heat rock all winter long.
That's what our dog does all winter. He just he walks into the room and he just flops on his side in the middle of the room because the floor is about 80 degrees.
Oh gosh, Millie would be in heaven. That would be great.
But I would say the one point of clarification on this, you can do radiant floor heat and keep your radiators. There's not one it's not one or the other. The distinction here is the floor heat needs to be 115 degrees if you've got wood floors. Your radiator heat usually is around 160 to 180 degrees. So what you need to add to your system in that situation is a mixing valve that tempers in cool water with the warm water so that you can supply two different temperatures of water. But if you've got an existing radiator system, and you want to replace your boiler with a new boiler and add staple up radiant heat from below, if you have access from your basement, it's a totally doable project to make you super comfortable.
I asked the right person here today to talk about this. I knew I did.
Well, this is fun for me. I mean, I think my career is my career in IT. If I weren't in IT, I think I'd probably be a boiler specialist.
That's so fun. Not a plaster specialist, huh? Boiler specialist.
No. I do plaster in my spare time.
All right. Well, thanks so much for being here again today, Alex.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. And thanks for inviting me to talk about this wonderful subject. I love it.
I hope somebody else will ask another question so that we can talk about it again.
Me too.
All right. Bye.
All right. Bye.
If you have an old house or DIY question that you would like for me and a guest to answer on an upcoming episode, please contact the show via the True Tales from Old Houses website or send me a direct message on Facebook or Instagram. And now it is your turn to answer a question, and there is a new one this season. I want to know, what have you learned since buying your old house? Here are a few of your answers from Instagram. Circa 1832 wrote, when demoing anything, do it slowly so you don't miss any original details that could be destroyed in haste. That is excellent advice. Thank you for that. Alyssa said, we've had to make all sorts of compromises or simply table projects for now. And Katie mentioned that she feels like she has learned a lifetime of knowledge, experience, and skills since buying her old house. Excellent answers, everyone. And if you would like to share your own answer to this season's question, send me a direct message through social media or head on over to truetalesfromoldhouses.com and let me know via the contact form or click the mic icon in the bottom right-hand corner to leave a voicemail using your phone or computer. Once again, this season's question is, what have you learned since buying your old house? Let's pause for a moment because I want to thank our sponsors. True Tales from Old Houses continues because of their generous support. So thank you to the Window Course from Scott Seidler of the Craftsman blog and Abitron. The Window Course is a step-by-step, do-it-yourself program that will teach you everything you need to know to successfully restore your wood windows. It is spring, finally, and we are entering the very best time of year for this type of work. The days are longer, warmer, and getting drier. It's the perfect time to take the Window Course and make the most of the next 6 to 8 months. The Window Course is yours to keep, so if you are restoring a window and you get stuck, you can go back and review as many times as necessary. No more digging through YouTube trying to find out which resources are the real deal. The Window Course is self-paced, so you can go as fast or as slow as you need to, and there are several price points to fit your needs and budget. And if you sign up for the Lifetime Access package or the training package, then you'll also get a free infrared paint remover, which is a $130 value. The Window Course is offered with a money-back guarantee, and I've got a coupon code to share. Scott is offering True Tales from Old Houses listeners a special discount. For 10% off, visit thewindowcourse.com and use the coupon code TrueTales. True Tales from Old Houses is also supported by Abitron. Abitron manufactures 2 of my very favorite wood repair products, liquid wood and wood epox. Over the years, I've talked about both a bunch on Instagram and my blog. I've used liquid wood and wood epox inside, outside, on windows and doors. I've even used it to sculpt new feet for the desk in my daughter's room. I always keep those 2 products on the shelf in my workshop. Wood epox and liquid wood make permanent, cost-effective repairs wherever you find rotted or damaged wood. And whether you are a first-timer or a professional tradesperson, Abitron products are super easy to use. The instructions are simple. The results are exceptional. No shrinking or sagging, and repairs can be sanded and painted just like wood. Follow Abitron on Facebook and Instagram. You'll find them at Abitron Inc., as in incorporated. To purchase liquid wood and wood epox, visit abitron.com. Use the coupon code TrueTales10, that's the number 10, to save 10% on your order. Before we dive into today's story, I already need to make a correction. During the interview, I messed up the definition of pictographs, and I forgot the word petroglyph altogether. Both are types of Native American rock art. Petroglyphs are carved into rock faces, and pictographs are painted. And it will all make sense soon, I promise. My guests today are Melissa and Matt Dunphy. A few years ago, they bought an old theater with an apartment upstairs to fulfill their dream of owning a performance space with on-site living quarters. During a large construction project that involved shoring up the building from underneath, workers disrupted 2 buried privies, otherwise known as toilet pits. Armed with shovels and a sense of adventure, Melissa and Matt were soon on their way to the accidental discovery of a museum's worth of artifacts from the 1700s and earlier.
My name is Melissa Dunphy. I am a composer by trade and an amateur archaeologist and podcast host by hobby.
And I'm Matt Dunphy. By day, I work in e-commerce. I've been a developer for as long as I've been of working age, but also play in punk bands now and then. But what we're talking about is our crazy adventures with our old houses.
Well, it is nice to meet you both. Thanks for being here.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Absolute pleasure.
Well, holy smokes, where to begin? You are incredibly interesting people, and the history behind the Bog House, your building, is completely bananas.
Yes.
As I was prepping for this interview, I was kind of staring at a blank sheet of paper. I kind of like, oh, what questions do I want to ask? And I realized I didn't even really know where to start. So we are going to talk mostly about amateur archaeology, but I wondered, do you have an elevator pitch for how you got to the Bog House? And keep in mind that we can go up and down the elevator several times.
Yes. Okay. So both Matt and I, we've been married for, nearly 19 years now. And we've had a couple of, fun house buying adventures. Our very first house that we bought when we were 26 was probably in the very typical, buy an old house and the two of us worked together to fix it up, bit by bit, renovation, DIY, all of that kind of thing.
I don't know how typical it was.
I mean, not a story that people haven't heard before.
Sure.
However, in 2014, Matt stumbled across a listing on Zillow.
Yeah, we were starting to look for kind of a live workspace. Melissa being a composer, me making loud music. We wanted somewhere where we could rehearse and keep equipment without having to drive to it. And so Philadelphia has been going through this transformation over the last couple of decades. And there's a lot of old industrial use buildings out there that have like a warehouse with a loft. And so we started looking, and I found a place within walking distance of my job, which was pretty great, that it was listed on Zillow as a single bedroom studio apartment with 3 bathrooms and 2,200 square feet, and listed for about half the price of other buildings on that block.
So the listing made no sense. So Matt clicks on it.
And, the first picture is this shabby 2-story row home. The next picture was a lobby.
A theater lobby.
Yeah. And done up in this sort of, almost vaudevillian style, like really classical looking. And then the next picture was a proscenium stage with like seats in front of it. None of this made any sense at all.
So the quick version is that we discovered it was a magic theater, as in a theater where magic shows were held, operated by a very strange man who had just gone to jail in a scandal. And after many months of negotiation with the foreclosing bank, we ended up buying it for an absolute steal. And we thought, that's an adventure in itself, right? All by itself. That's like a wild story of buying a property.
Yes.
But we knew that we needed to build an apartment for us to live in above this building. We wanted to sort of have a little performance space and then live above it. And during the construction of our apartment, they had to dig into the foundation to sort of underpin the foundation to support an apartment on top. And the construction accidentally stumbled across 2 brick features down underground, which turned out to be 2 privies. Privies are toilet pits from the 18th century. So from the 1700s. Filled, like chock-a-block filled, with all kinds of artifacts from around the era of the Revolutionary War. And Matt and I became from people who were interested in history.
Living in Philadelphia, it's hard not to have a casual interest in history. I would walk past Independence Hall almost every day going to grab lunch, for example. And there are blocks around us where you can see architecture from the 18th, 19th, 20th, and 21st century. It's a pretty incredible little town. But this was transformative.
This was like suddenly we are touching objects coming out of the ground that were used by people 200 to 300 years ago. And
fingerprints of people.
Right. Like pottery that you could see how it was made, and you really connected to the people who created them and used them. Little aside, I was getting my PhD at the time at the University of Pennsylvania in music. And as I tell people, PhD students, graduate students, we love to procrastinate by just going on some wild tangent that has nothing to do with our dissertation. So I took like 2 years longer to get my PhD than I should have, because I went down this rabbit hole of researching, first of all, how do we do this archaeology? Like, how do we most responsibly, as 2 non-trained people, dig up this stuff and learn about it and retain the information from this stuff? And secondly, how do I, just all of the historical research. Who lived in our property? Who owned this stuff? What does this mean? How does this relate to the history of our city? And maybe most meaningfully, what is our place in this history of the property, of the land that we own, of the place where we live? And along the way, we started this podcast, the Bog House, because it was so much information.
To a party, right? We were doing our own thing, and we'd get invited out to a party, and somebody would ask us, "Oh, what did you get up to this weekend? It's good to see you. I haven't seen you in a couple of years." It's like, well, we've been reassembling these chamber pots from this 18th century trash pit that's on the Magic Theater that we bought, and 45 minutes later, like, we've told a fraction of the story.
Okay, well, let's go back just a little bit, because I don't want you to tell everything in like 10 minutes and then we're done. We're like, okay, goodbye.
Impossible.
Thank you very much. That was fabulous. But let me go back to that time when you found the privies. So did the construction crew find them? Did you find them? How did you know what you were looking at?
Well, the funny thing was, construction started the week that we were actually up in Connecticut at the National Puppetry Conference. This is Melissa's the director of music composition up there. And that itself, we did an interview with the podcast about that. I was like, that could be its own podcast.
I'm trying to decide if we should just let that go. Like, just make people, think, oh, puppetry, huh?
We'll
or if we you should at least tell us what a puppetry conference
we
is.
have very diverse interests, and I love theater as well. I'm big into the performing arts, and I'm involved with the National Puppetry Conference at the Eugene O'Neill Theater Center in Connecticut. It's sort of the cradle of American theater. And the puppetry conference was started by Jim Henson and his crew, and people involved with that. So it's just the coolest thing. I create music for puppet shows, and I meet a ton of puppetry artists from all over the world. And it's sort of a wonderful week up in Connecticut of workshops and creation. It's colloquially known as Puppet Camp. In 2016, Matt, it comes up as my assistant. We were up at Puppet Camp. And when we came back, these construction pits had been dug. Now, construction workers aren't usually on the lookout for archaeology. They're not. If they see strange artifacts come out of the ground, 99 times out of 100, the construction workers aren't really clocking them or that interested in them. And to them, they've been hired to dig a hole. They've not been hired to inspect the contents of that hole for interesting pottery or whatever. But when we came back to the construction zone, I noticed in the piles of dirt that the construction workers had dug, there were some weird bits of glass. Was the first thing I noticed. There was the base of a wine bottle was sort of the first thing that I said, hey, what's that? And I clambered onto the pile of dirt and picked up this very old looking broken base of a wine bottle. It was really heavy, the glass was nearly a half an inch thick in places. And it didn't look like it had come out of, a factory that you see wine bottles look very regular and nice. This was sort of rude and irregular. And I thought, wow, that looks really cool. I don't know what that is. So I took it home and I took a picture of it and I sent it to Matt, and I, did some Googling. The Google research that I was coming up with said this bottle is almost certainly pre-Civil War. I thought, wow, that's so cool. I'm
so old.
So I'm from Australia, as you can probably tell from my accent. I'm not from Philadelphia, but Australia and America are both fairly young nations. So, anything that's I know I've listened to some of your podcast, and, an old house in America is not that old compared to the rest of the world, but to us, 100 years, 150 years, that's really old. That's so cool and historical. So I sent the picture to Matt.
And I worked about a 15-minute walk from this building. So after work, I popped on over and just started taking a look at these dirt piles from the 12 holes that they had dug up. And I noticed different kinds of pottery, like little bits and pieces, what we later would learn were called sherds of pottery, as well as animal bones. So I grabbed a Wawa bag. That's the infamous Philadelphia convenience store. The construction workers had left one of those. And I just put them in, figuring I'd go home, Google this. I have no concept, no idea what I'm looking at. Like, I know that it's pottery.
Sure.
And that was really kind of how it started is, all right, we've got stuff that's coming out of this pit. And I knew enough about sort of old construction in the area to know that this is a privy. Like, I could see bricks in one of the cuts, one of the holes. I think this was around the time that they were actually doing construction of the Museum of the American Revolution, literally down the block from where I was working.
This is an amazing museum in Philadelphia that was being built in 2016. I think it opened 2017, and is all about Philadelphia during the 18th century. So we were sort of following on their blog about the construction process, and they were posting about artifacts that they had found on that site, which is about, I don't know, half a mile south of us. So Matt noticed that some of our pottery, our artifacts that were in our construction zone, looked a lot like the ones that they were posting on their blog. And little aside, Matt and I, when we were kids, we grew up separately, obviously on different continents, but we both, as is typical for many kids, went through archaeology phases. I can remember my parents had a World Book Encyclopedia set from 1987. And if you picked up the volume of that set, it would fall open at ancient Egypt. And I used to dream about, how cool it would be to be an archaeologist. Of course, I watched the Indiana Jones movies when I was a kid, but I was really interested in archaeology. Of course, that particular, career dream did not eventuate, but the interest stays with you into adulthood. I still think archaeology is really cool.
Well, especially when it's unsatisfied as a kid. Like the neighborhood I grew up in was kind of made in the 80s in central Pennsylvania. So at best I would find like fill, but not even that, like little bits of brick in the dirt. I was always so disappointed that you hear about like, oh, there are arrowheads and all kinds of things you can find in Pennsylvania. Not where I grew up. No. There was a Kmart and cows at the other end of the street.
That's funny. I grew up in a national park, so we were always looking for Native American artifacts, always, just
so
playing
cool.
around and looking. So sometimes we found, paintings.
What?
Like pictograph type stuff?
Thank you. Sometimes pictographs are the ones that are carved in. And then the other word is the painted on.
Which
have to look that
park?
up. So I grew up in Zion National Park in southern Utah.
Oh yeah.
That's so awesome.
Just a little park. You might have heard of it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Every time I do that, trust me, I realize that my childhood was very, very special. But sometimes, when I'm in it, I'm like, oh yeah, and I grew up in a national park. And people are like, what? And then I tell them and like, oh yeah. And then when we would find pictographs on the side of the walls. And
but that's exactly the kind of thing that I would be jealous of as a kid. Like, I think that's amazing. It's wonderful that you had that experience. So that inner 8-year-old lit up when I'm going through the dirt. And I'm like, this doesn't look like something you can buy in the store. This doesn't look like 20th century trash. This is weird and old, and such a variety in the first collection of little potsherds that I found.
So, after we had ascertained that these objects were older than we thought and, old enough to be pretty interesting and cool, we went back to the site together in the middle of the night when the construction workers were out of the way and did some more poking around. And we sort of, Matt had identified where the privy was that most of these artifacts were coming out of. And we could actually see that in one of the construction pits, the remains of 2 privies were sort of all in this one pit. And, we held off for a long time. We sort of thought, well, we don't want to mess up the construction, but this stuff is so cool. And, there's a certain, I want to call it almost treasure hunting urge when you look down into a hole in the ground and you can see little bits of pottery and sort of stacked broken ceramics and bones and all kinds of things in the wall of the dirt.
Like cross sections of a plate. You can look and see like, that is definitely a plate that's just been sliced through by these dudes with shovels. And yeah, to Melissa's point, we were trying to avoid because, like, who knows? This is foundation work, right? We don't want to mess that up. That's important. And they kind of asked us not to do that. But then in one of the piles of dirt, as we're sort of sifting through that, I found a piece of pottery and it said navigation.
It had blue writing on it with a word.
And that shifted it even further back. They weren't, yes, pre-Civil War for the wine bottle. That's pretty old. But navigation, we're talking a different era when people are writing that on plates or bowls.
Wow. Like, what does this mean? It definitely lit this fire in both of us. Like, how old is this stuff? Right. Are we talking about, the age of exploration? Like, what is going on? So the long and the short of it was that the call of these artifacts, the call of these treasures was too great for us to resist. We jumped into the hole against the advice of our construction
inner
foreman.
8-year-olds. Your inner 8-year-olds. Yeah. I get it.
Yeah. We couldn't resist. We jumped into the hole and we started excavating. And eventually, when our construction guys saw what we were getting out, they gave us their full blessing, actually, because they were like, oh my gosh. And it was interesting, our foreman, he felt really bad. He sort of said, I can't believe I didn't even notice this stuff when it was coming out of the hole. Like, I didn't really see it. And it's that thing, when you're not looking for it, when your job is just to dig a hole and you're not looking at the shovel full of dirt going, what's in this? It's very easy to just miss the history that's underground.
It's also not easy digging when you hit a privy because, yes, we're talking about the pottery and the glass, but what we haven't mentioned are the bricks and the oyster shells and just so much. It's not a fun thing to dig. So if you're there trying to dig a hole, you just hear crunch and you're digging as much as you can. You're not even looking because you're trying to get down like 6-7 feet into the earth here.
Yeah.
Well, let's pause for just a second because I want to ask you about the construction. So there you had holes to shore up your foundation so that you could redo this building, but then you find these artifacts. So how long did you have to put the construction on hold and how did you pivot, I guess, basically?
Putting construction on hold is generally only something that wealthy people can do who have the money to furlough your workers or things like that. When you're on a construction schedule, I mean, time is money, right? Like, yes, construction people often juggle several different projects at once, but it's, we were not the kind of owners who had so much money that we could sort of say, okay, this construction project is on hold for 6 months while we bring in professional archaeologists to do all of this work.
Quite the opposite.
Quite the opposite. We were really doing this construction by the skin of our financial teeth, I will say. So we kind of worked out a deal with our contractors. We asked them when they were planning on filling this hole, and that became our archaeology schedule. They said the hole will probably be open for a week and a half, 2 weeks at most.
Wow, no pressure.
Right. We have that much time and we can't really do archaeology while the construction workers are actively working. So guess what? Let's just not really sleep for a couple of weeks. Go in at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon when the construction workers knock off. We come in with our overalls and our buckets and our sifters and our trowels and
our keyboard warrior physical physique.
Yeah. Neither Matt or I are gym rats.
Might want to stretch a little bit on the upper body there before you start digging.
I think Matt had sprained his back before we even got into the holes. So I did the majority of the digging, which if you could see my arms, you're all podcast listeners, so you cannot see my arms, but my arms are almost like negative space. They're so skinny.
We have a long-standing joke about my T-Rex arms, so I totally get it. Yeah, they're pretty useless overall.
Totally useless. But, when you have that drive and you have that timeline and you have that dream, it's kind of like, well, it's me or nothing. I kept thinking, of an imaginary future where I was living in the apartment, could I actually sleep easy knowing that I had just left all this stuff underground, unexplored, undiscovered, without attempting and doing my very best to learn and get it out and discover what it is that was down there? And I decided the answer to that question was absolutely not. I would never be able to, get a good night's sleep again.
Well, and we actually got to play both sides of that card. I think we mentioned that we found 2 privies when this hole was dug. One of them that we fully excavated only went down about 6.5 feet, which is very unusual.
It's a small privy by Philadelphia privy standards.
So, 6 feet in diameter, 6.5 feet deep. Great, because within, we spent 3 nights basically digging that out, cleaning that out. The other one, in the first 6 feet, it was like ash, dirt, bricks, and whatever.
Not really any artifacts to speak of. And our first assumption was that maybe it didn't have any artifacts in it. Maybe it got cleaned out of artifacts at some point before it was filled in.
But on that last night of digging the first privy, we just scraped a little bit more dirt on that second privy, and we found a potsherd. But we were like, we have enough. We have so much. We had no idea where we were going with this. We have so much. We'll just leave this one.
Yeah.
But like Melissa said, that ate at us.
Yeah. When we eventually moved into our apartment a year or so later, we kept thinking about that second privy that we hadn't completely explored and dug out. And we decided that we would try to get back into it. So throughout 2019, the second half of 2019, we actually found an angle to dig out that second privy. It took several months because that privy ended up going down 19.5 feet below the ground. Yes. So a brick, just for viewers who aren't aware, privies in the 18th century were sort of cylinders of bricks going down into the ground. So they would dig a hole and they would line it with bricks, no mortar in the bricks. So just sort of a rows of bricks that lined the privy. So as you dig the privy, it's almost like you're excavating a huge chimney that continues down into the ground. And when the chimney stops, you've reached the bottom of the privy. And that chimney, that privy, that tunneled into the ground just kept going for 19.5
my
feet.
goodness.
It was amazing.
And to be clear, you found a way to get in that didn't disrupt construction, or was construction
exactly
stopped?
So
okay.
Construction was done.
Construction was finished, like the foundation work was finished, and the concrete that they poured to support our walls didn't completely cover the top of that privy. So we were able to sort of find an angle to get into that privy and keep digging down. And it sure was an adventure.
And the nice thing about it was, we had rushed so much in that first one and we had no idea what we were doing. We had a couple of years of talking to professionals and talking to other privy diggers and learning more about the process. And because this is an indoor dig, it's, talking to archaeologists, they say, oh man, I wish I could live above an active archaeological dig, like just to be able to go downstairs. We were kind of living their dream.
Roll out of bed, go downstairs and dig some artifacts.
So when we say it took months, that was by choice, where we were able to dig this stuff up, put the spoil pile to the side, get the big stuff out first, and then go back and re-sift the spoils and find things like Native American trade beads and all kinds of little bits, and find more complete collections of these artifacts that combine into almost functional teapots, for example.
Right.
We've glued them together. I wouldn't necessarily put hot water in there.
You wouldn't put it on your nice table and fill it with water?
Well,
depends what you consider nice. We have now, I would say, hundreds, maybe even thousands of pots that were dumped down in that privy. Definitely thousands of artifacts, thousands and thousands of individual pottery pieces that we have combined into hundreds of plates, cups, bowls, teapots, porringers, which is like a little stew pot with a handle. What else? We have jugs. We have glass bottles of all different kinds. We have
coins.
We have a couple coins. We have some pipes that you smoke tobacco in. Lots of pipes, actually.
Turns out toilets were disgusting.
As I like to tell people, I think I tried smoking a pipe as sort of an anthropological experiment when we pulled out a pipe that was smokable. I thought, well, I'm gonna commune with the past by smoking this pipe. It was disgusting, but things to remember is that 18th century toilets were kind of disgusting. So I could imagine picking up a pipe habit in the 1700s, just because going into one of these old outhouses would have smelled so bad that smoking a tobacco pipe, no matter, like, the smellier the tobacco, the better, actually, to cover the smell of the toilet.
Right. Almost incense.
Yes.
Right. The other, we found a bunch of munitions, actually.
Yes, we have a couple cannonballs.
Some grape shot, so little tiny, sort of like a giant shotgun shell. Terrible weapon of war. We found a piece of metal that was really decorative that we couldn't really make out what it was. We learned about how to do electrolysis, so we set this in a bath of chemicals and electricity. It got all of the sort of rust off of it. Still couldn't figure out what it was. Put it on Facebook, and our gun friends were like, "Oh, that's the cock from a flintlock pistol." And then we found the flint that goes in it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, every object that we found, we, research as much as we can about it. We learn where it's come from, about how old it is, what it was used for, what it says about the people who lived here who threw it down into the toilet. Were they rich? Were they poor? Were they English or Dutch? Did they do a lot of trade? Maybe they were ship captains, and so that's why they have all of this stuff from all over the world. It tells you so much about their everyday lives and what it felt like and looked like, and was like to be an early American. Actually, I say an American, but a lot of this stuff is before the Declaration of Independence. So, these were British colonials who were on the colony of America, but would not have considered themselves Americans the same way because the nation hadn't been founded yet. I'm so fascinated by this connection to the past. And it made me really think about the fact that, in America and in Australia too, we tend not to really do a lot of research into who lived in our houses before us and who lived on our land before us. Maybe we know the people directly before us that we bought a house from, but most people don't sort of do the research to go back any further. And I think that there's something really valuable and cool about digging into the research, if it's possible, finding your local historical society, seeing what's available online to see who it was that lived on your property and how far back you can go. It puts things into perspective, and it makes, I think it makes you a better steward of your neighborhood in a lot of ways, thinking about where you fit into this chronology and who were the people who took care of this land before you.
We're very lucky living in Philadelphia, being that it was a pretty important colonial city, full of lawyers, newspapers, and Quakers who basically would gossip and write it down every week. So we were able to really not only trace ownership, but learn about the people who were alive, who owned this building at the time that this stuff was being thrown down the pit, even to the point where we know what they look like. There are paintings of the folks from the 1760s, when, like, the exact era that this was owned by them. Now, they didn't necessarily live here, but they definitely stepped foot in the property.
They definitely used the bathroom. Yes.
Yeah.
I think so.
So real quickly, my understanding of the privy, and you can certainly clarify this, is that it was, you'd use the toilet, but things that were also broken or chipped or whatnot, or that you were discarding, that's where they went, because we didn't have the trash service that came by once a week and picked up the garbage. So some of the things that went into the privy would have probably already been broken.
Yes.
Maybe most of it.
Well, actually, this was a question for me. So when we started excavating, I started thinking about the volume of stuff that we were pulling out. As I said, thousands of artifacts, hundreds of plates and bowls. And some of them appeared to be, well, obviously they weren't whole now, they were broken, but the whole plate would be there, or the whole bowl would be there. And, there's a question in my head. How many bowls and plates have you broken in your entire life? Like I've broken a lot of plates and bowls in my life, but I don't think I've broken that many plates and bowls, And so I had this huge question for the longest time, for months, maybe longer. Why did they break so many plates and bowls? Granted, we found a lot of wine bottles and alcohol bottles down there too. And so, I had this image at first of 18th century Philadelphians just being so alcoholic and drunk all the time that they were just constantly breaking all of their fragile wares. But this got answered finally, and to my great relief, by some archaeologists who came over to look at our stuff and explained that in the 18th century, imagine moving house in the 18th century. I had never thought about this. This is the kind of stuff that I love about this story, because it tells you these little details about life. Moving is a pain in the butt. We all know that. Moving is horrible. But actually, moving in the modern age is so much easier than it was back then, because we have bubble wrap, we have cardboard boxes. These were things that they didn't have. We have cars with really good suspension and very smooth roads. So all of that time that we spend packaging up all of our plates and bubble wrap and newspaper and cardboard boxes and putting them in the car, back then you have cobblestone streets, wagons with no suspension. It would have been really expensive to get wooden crates made. The best thing you have in terms of bubble wrap is like hay. So it ended up being, cost value analysis, cheaper for people to throw away a lot of their plates and bowls and things before they moved. And then wherever they moved to, they would just find the local potter or the local crockery dealer and buy a whole ton of new stuff, like a whole new kitchen, a whole new place setting, brand new.
Wow.
So it shifted in my head, this idea of, we decry 21st century disposable culture for good reason, like disposable consumerism. But this has been going on way longer than we think, actually. It made me think of, IKEA furniture, which is not meant to last, and how when I was a college student moving around a lot, we would, instead of moving our IKEA furniture with us, if you moved to a different city, you would just leave it on the sidewalk for someone else to take. And at the new city, you'd go to the IKEA and just buy some more flat pack furniture and bring it into your home. So it's the same concept, but with plates and bowls and pots.
Wow. Yeah, I had never really thought about it that way, because I'd only considered probably less city life, because my upbringing was more rural. So I was probably thinking about, maybe a few owners with the outhouse in the back and tossing things. But yeah, this is a different story altogether. That's really interesting to me.
Yeah. And it explains why a lot of the stuff that was dumped in, really came from like one period. And it was probably one person, one family who said, well, we're moving back to England, say, or we're moving, down south to North Carolina or something. So everything in the kitchen, just throw it all in the privy at once. And it's like a snapshot, a capsule of this family's life. It's just so cool. It gives me goosebumps thinking about it.
Absolutely. So have you or what are you doing with all of this? Are you cataloging it? Are you studying it? Are you making a sort of a map of the oldest artifact to the newest artifact? How's this going?
Yeah, it was important for me to share this. When we found this stuff, I was like, I think this is cool, but I bet there are people who can actually do like important research, like learn from what it is. And so from the very start, we cleaned, organized, and reassembled as much as we could. We made a little handmade light box. and I got my DSLR camera and photographed all of our finds and uploaded that to Flickr because I'm that old. And that is actually what got us in touch with the professionals. I did all this because when we first found this stuff, we reached out to a variety of different sources and said, "Oh, we need help. We might need to do some archaeology." Nobody got back to us. Once we photographed and documented and uploaded that, I emailed that to a couple of different sources, and then people got very interested. So this has continued to the point where we're actually writing an article for Ceramics in America, which is an annual journal produced by the Chipstone Foundation. It's a wonderful, beautiful hardcover book. It's a little bit academic, but it's also used by curators, art historians,
and archaeologists,
and of course archaeologists. And the stuff itself right now,
we are very lucky that we don't have kids and we are only responsible for a couple of cats, which means that the archaeology can take over our home without, without it being super disruptive. Like if we owned a very big dog or something, I think it would have been a disaster. But we have stuff all over our house in Tupperware containers I have cleared our local IKEA out of Ivar shelving, the wonderful modular shelving that has taken over half my home so I can store all of this stuff. Temporarily, we hope, more on that in a second. But I have basically a catalog in my head of where everything is. Spoilers, we've since dug several other privies on our block as well. So as our block, we mentioned right at the top that our area was kind of pseudo-industrial, warehouses, that kind of thing. And it's gentrifying right now. People are building apartments and that sort of thing. And as they dig their foundation pits, we get to look over out of our back porch and see, oh my gosh, there's another privy over there. There's another privy over there. And so we go onto these construction sites and dig the privies that are there and rescue these finds before the construction workers come in with backhoes and dig it all out and just take it to the dump.
Right.
Yeah, because again, the construction workers aren't trained or interested in finding this stuff. So we have currently in our house the contents of 7 privies.
Which is getting close to what the Museum of the American Revolution had.
Yeah.
I remember seeing their blog posts about their site because it's in historic Philadelphia and it's a large, large building. So they had 9 or 14, a good amount. So you'll remember when I said we finished that one privy, we're like, this is so much stuff. We're done.
We have so many artifacts.
And now we've dug 7 around us. When we had friends from the museum world come and visit, we talked a little bit about what are we going to do? And I said, well, hopefully.
I said, yeah, so our plan for this stuff, our eventual plan for this stuff is that when we finish the performing arts space downstairs on the first floor, the lobby of that space will be a dedicated little museum to the artifacts that we found. And so I expressed this desire to the museum people, and they gave me a look and said, this is not a little museum. I don't know what you think this is going to be, but you have the contents of quite a large museum here. And, I may have bitten off more than I can chew. I don't know. But later this year in July, Matt and I are planning a fact-finding, working vacation trip to the UK and Amsterdam to visit a bunch of museums over there that have artifacts, house museums, small museums, big museums. I want to get ideas about how we can bring this stuff to the public and open up our own little space.
Wow.
And
I just got chills.
I'm really excited about it. I'm really excited about it because here in Philly, it's a rough and tumble town in a lot of ways. And I think that this would be a wonderful way for people in our neighborhood and regular Philadelphians all over the city to think about that history, that unbroken line of ownership that we have to the people who lived in the house before us, and take pride in what your property can tell you about their lives. And think about the treasures, or, treasures, I use that not in a monetary sense, but in like an information sense and an excitement sense that could be found on your property. Yeah, so we want to open a museum, and hopefully I'll be able to take some of this stuff out of the walls of Tupperware containers and display them in a beautiful, museum display environment, and give people information about what this means and what they can discover too.
Well, I wish it wasn't so, but we're out of time. It makes me sad. I don't want to end.
I've had so much fun talking with you about this.
Oh my goodness, I have too. You've inspired me, and now I'm excited to see your museum when it eventually opens. And I'll just, of course, listening to all of the episodes. But before we end today, please do tell everyone where they can listen to your podcast and where they can follow along with your project.
Sure. You basically have to search for the Bog House, which doesn't really work well if you're using voice-activated search, we found.
It's an old colloquial term for a toilet. So it's the bog or the Bog House. I'm familiar with it as an Australian, actually. We would say, I got to go use the bog is an Australian term.
I had no idea.
Most Americans don't, but I was sort of like, well, it's going to be unique. So Bog House, it's like dog house, but with a B.
Okay.
Yeah, and we're on all the usual streaming platforms, or if you go to boghouse.thehannah.org. Before we found actual history on our property, we were trying to figure out a name for the theater that would conjure the history of Philadelphia. And we're on a street called Callow Hill Street. We named our theater the Hannah at Callow Hill Street because Hannah Callow Hill, William Penn's second wife, was technically America's first governor.
First female governor.
Right.
So, the theater, the museum will eventually be called the Hannah. So if you go to thehannah.org, you can also read a blog where we talk about, before we did the podcast, we did a blog and talked about our stuff and posted pictures. So you can find out more about us there.
Are you on Instagram as well?
Yes. The Bog House Podcast. I know we had to pick a really long name, but the Bog House Podcast on Instagram, and you can search for the Bog House on Twitter as well. We have an active Twitter account, and we're on Facebook.
Okay.
Not on TikTok yet because we're just not young enough. Maybe.
I feel that. I'm like, this is the week I'm going to do TikTok. No, maybe next week. Maybe the week after. Like, I'm just not ready to dance and do whatever it is I have to do to be on TikTok.
I need to hire a 17-year-old to make our TikTok account because, I have friends who you would make a really great TikTok account. You could do TikToks about how you clean artifacts and put them together and, all of that kind of thing. And I'm like, yeah, that would be great. If you could make me another 4 or 5 hours in each day, if we could have 29 or 30-hour days, then I should be able to do that any day now.
Right. Or that team that I'm going to hire with all the money that I'm not making doing this thing I'm doing on the side. Yes.
Of course.
Yes.
Agree.
When the privy vomits forth nuggets of gold, we'll get right on that TikTok plan. Okay.
Well, this has been just great. And I'm going to put all of that information in the show notes too. So people, if you can't remember where to find them, it's all going to be in the show notes here. And thank you so, so much for being here today.
Thank you, Stacey. It's been such a pleasure.
Good luck with all your excavation.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to True Tales from Old Houses. And thank you to my guests, Melissa and Matt Dunphy and Alex Santantonio. If you have a moment, we would love it if you would leave a rating or review wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. To continue the conversation, be sure to follow True Tales from Old Houses and Blake Hill House on Facebook and Instagram. For bonus content and special offerings, please consider becoming a subscriber on our brand new Patreon. And if you're looking for more information about this episode, including photos, show notes, coupon codes, and to request a transcript, visit truetalesfromoldhouses.com. Until next time.